The flight attendant's palm connected with Jamal's face, the sound echoing through the first-class cabin. Silence fell as passengers gasped. "Get back to economy where you belong," she hissed. Unknown to her, Terrell Washington, CEO of Skyline Airways, watched his son's tears from 3 rows back. Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If this caught your attention, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about justice prevailing in unexpected ways. Now, let's see how this airline CEO responds when his son becomes a victim of discrimination right before his eyes. Terrell Washington wasn't just any father taking his son on a trip to Disney World. As the billionaire CEO who had recently acquired Skyline Airways in a surprising industry move, he understood the value of both privilege and life lessons. This trip with 11-year-old Jamal was carefully designed to teach independence while still keeping a watchful eye from afar. "Dad, do I really have to sit by myself?" Jamal asked, fidgeting with the zipper of his blue Nike hoodie as they waited in the premium lounge of Atlanta International Airport. Terrell looked down at his son with a mixture of pride and concern. At 42, he had built his fortune from nothing, starting with a small logistics company in his garage that eventually expanded into a transportation empire. The acquisition of Skyline Airways just 3 months ago had been his boldest move yet, though he'd kept his ownership relatively quiet, preferring to observe operations from the shadows before making major changes. "Son, you're 11 now. Part of growing up is learning to handle yourself in different situations," Terrell explained, straightening his custom-tailored charcoal suit. "I'll be on the same flight, just a few rows back. Think of it as practice for the future." What Terrell didn't say was that he wanted to observe how his son would be treated when flying alone as a young black boy in first class. Throughout his rise to success, Terrell had experienced countless instances of discrimination. From being followed in high-end stores to being questioned about his presence in executive spaces. He wanted to see if his airline was any different. Jamal nodded reluctantly, pulling his carry-on closer. "Okay, but you promise you'll be there if I need you?" "Always," Terrell assured him, his voice firm with conviction. "I'm never more than a moment away." Flight attendant Brenda Kavanaugh had been with Skyline Airways for 15 years. At 53, she considered herself part of the airline's old guard, taking pride in her meticulous adherence to procedure and tradition. When she saw young Jamal boarding the first-class cabin wearing jeans, a hoodie, and bright red sneakers, her eyebrows immediately arched with suspicion. "Ticket, please," she requested, her tone sharper than with previous passengers. When Jamal produced his first-class boarding pass, she examined it with unusual scrutiny. "Are you sure you're in the right section?" she asked, looking over his casual attire with obvious disapproval. "First class is in this cabin." "Yes, ma'am," Jamal replied politely, just as his father had taught him. "Seat 2A." Brenda reluctantly directed him to his seat, mumbling something about standards these days, just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Several rows back, Terrell boarded and took his seat in 5C, observing the interaction with a clenched jaw. He nodded politely when Brenda's demeanor completely transformed as she welcomed him aboard with a warm smile. Once settled in his spacious first-class seat, Jamal tried to enjoy the experience. He'd flown first class with his father many times, but this was his first time alone. The flight attendants moved through the cabin offering pre-departure beverages. Brenda stopped at each passenger, providing attentive service, until she reached Jamal. "Juice or water?" she asked curtly, not offering the full selection of beverages available to other passengers. "May I have apple juice, please?" Jamal requested. She placed a plastic cup of juice on his tray without a napkin and moved on quickly. From his vantage point, Terrell noticed how other passengers received glass tumblers with linen napkins and a wider selection of drink options. He made mental notes on his phone, recording each discrepancy in service. The flight took off smoothly, but 20 minutes into the journey, they hit a patch of turbulence. The seatbelt sign had just been turned off, and Jamal needed to use the restroom. He carefully made his way forward, holding on to seatbacks for balance as the plane occasionally bumped through rough air. As he approached the first-class lavatory, the plane jolted suddenly. Jamal stumbled, accidentally bumping into Brenda, who was preparing the beverage cart. "I'm sorry," he apologized immediately. Brenda's reaction was instantaneous and disproportionate. Her face contorted with anger as she grabbed his shoulder. "What are you doing up here?" she demanded loudly. "You can't just wander around the cabin during turbulence." "I was just trying to," Jamal began, but Brenda cut him off. "I've seen this before," she said, voice rising. "Economy passengers sneaking up to use the first-class bathrooms. You need to return to your proper section." "But I'm in first class," Jamal protested, pointing toward his seat. "Seat 2A. The plane jolted again, and Brenda's frustration peaked. Before Jamal could finish his explanation, her hand struck his face, not hard enough to cause physical injury, but with enough force to shock everyone who witnessed it. The slap echoed through the suddenly silent cabin. "Get back to economy where you belong," she hissed, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Tears welled in Jamal's eyes, more from humiliation than pain. 3 rows back, Terrell had already started recording on his phone, capturing the entire incident. His first instinct was to leap from his seat and confront Brenda, to protect his son as any father would. But years of business strategy and navigating white-dominated spaces had taught him that immediate reaction wasn't always the most effective approach. Instead, he continued recording, his face a mask of controlled fury. This wasn't just about his son anymore, it was about every black child who had ever been unfairly treated, assumed to be out of place in spaces they had every right to occupy. As CEO, he now had the power to address this systematically, not just individually. Jamal stood frozen, a tear rolling down his cheek as passengers stared in shock. Terrell waited, watching to see how his son would handle himself, ready to intervene at any moment but giving Jamal the chance to find his own dignity in this terrible moment. The cabin remained eerily quiet after the slap. Jamal, fighting back tears, turned and walked with as much dignity as an 11-year-old could muster back to his seat in 2A. His shoulders were rigid, his head held high despite the visible wetness on his cheeks. He had been taught by his father how to maintain composure in the face of injustice, a lesson no child should have to learn, but one Terrell knew was necessary in the world they lived in. The reactions from other passengers varied dramatically. An elderly white couple in 1C and 1D exchanged uncomfortable glances before purposefully returning to their magazines, choosing invisibility over involvement. A middle-aged Asian man in 3B shook his head disapprovingly but remained silent. From 4A, a white woman in a business suit loudly cleared her throat and shot Brenda a disgusted look. "That was completely unnecessary," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Brenda ignored her, busying herself with the drink cart while maintaining an expression of self-righteous indignation. She clearly believed she had caught someone breaking rules and had acted appropriately, despite the obvious overreaction. Another flight attendant, Stephanie Jackson, had witnessed the incident from the galley. A black woman in her early 30s, she had experienced her own share of microaggressions during her 5 years with Skyline. Her jaw tightened as she watched Jamal return to his seat. After a moment's hesitation, she grabbed a can of ginger ale and a packet of cookies, making her way to his seat. "Hey there," she said softly, placing the items on his tray. "Thought you might like something special." "Turbulence can be scary, huh?" Jamal nodded silently, grateful for the small kindness. "You okay?" Stephanie asked quietly, making sure other passengers couldn't hear. "Yes, ma'am," Jamal answered automatically, though his trembling hands told a different story. "What's your name?" she asked. "Jamal Washington." Stephanie's eyes widened slightly at the last name but maintained her professional composure. "Well, Jamal Washington, if you need anything else during this flight, you just press this call button, okay? I'll come right away." Back in the galley, Brenda was already justifying her actions to another crew member. "He was wandering around during turbulence, could have hurt himself, she insisted. And you know these kids from economy are always trying to sneak up here to use our bathrooms. Stephanie approached, her expression carefully neutral. Brenda, that boy is in seat 2A. He's a first-class passenger. What? No, he can't be, Brenda scoffed. Did you see what he's wearing? Probably just found an empty seat while boarding. I checked the manifest, Stephanie replied evenly. He's ticketed for 2A, and his last name is Washington. So? As in possibly related to Terrell Washington? Who's that supposed to be? Brenda asked dismissively. Stephanie lowered her voice. There are rumors the airline was recently acquired by a black entrepreneur named Washington. I don't know if they're related, but either way, you just struck a child passenger. That's never acceptable, regardless of who they are. Color drained from Brenda's face as the implications began to sink in. He bumped into me during turbulence. I reacted instinctively. By slapping him and telling him to go back to economy where he belongs? Stephanie questioned. That's going to be hard to explain in an incident report. Meanwhile, Terrell was texting his executive team, need full passenger manifest and crew list for flight SK-722 ATL to MCO. Incident on board requiring immediate attention upon landing. Have regional director meet plane. No alerts to flight crew yet. TW** he received an immediate response, on it, sir. Regional Director Alicia Carter will meet the flight. Do you need security? Terrell replied, no security. Just Alicia and privacy for a meeting. Record of all previous passenger complaints regarding FA staff, particularly Brenda Kavanaugh, with that handled, Terrell finally stood and made his way to Jamal's seat. Several passengers watched with interest as he knelt beside his son. Hey, champion, he said gently. Jamal looked up in surprise, then relief flooded his face. Dad. I saw what happened, Terrell said, keeping his voice low and controlled. Are you all right? Jamal nodded, then whispered, why did she do that? I didn't do anything wrong. Terrell took the empty seat beside his son, which had remained unoccupied for the flight. Sometimes people make judgments based on what they see on the outside, not who you really are. It's wrong, and it's not your fault. Aren't you going to say something to her? Jamal asked, glancing toward Brenda who was now watching them with growing apprehension. Terrell placed a hand on his son's shoulder. There's a time for immediate reaction and a time for strategic response. Right now, I'm choosing strategy. Sometimes the most powerful move isn't the fastest one. But she hit me, Jamal protested. And she will be held accountable, Terrell assured him. But I want you to understand something important. In situations like this, maintaining your dignity often means not giving others the emotional reaction they expect. It means calculating your response for maximum impact. Jamal considered this. Like chess. Terrell smiled slightly. Exactly like chess. Sometimes you sacrifice a pawn to capture the queen. He squeezed his son's shoulder. I recorded what happened. Trust me on this, what we do next will matter more than just yelling at her now. The captain's voice came over the intercom announcing their descent into Orlando. Terrell returned to his seat after ensuring Jamal was okay. As the plane began its approach, tension hung in the air. Brenda avoided the first-class cabin entirely, leaving Stephanie to handle the pre-landing procedures. From the window, the fantasy spires of Disney World were visible in the distance, a stark contrast to the very real drama unfolding within the aircraft. As the wheels touched down on the runway, both father and son knew this vacation was beginning with an unexpected lesson, one not found in any theme park. The plane taxied to the gate with an air of uneasy normality. Most passengers had witnessed the incident but tried to pretend otherwise, creating an atmosphere thick with unspoken tension. In the cockpit, Captain David Harrington received an unusual message from ground operations. Flight Attendant Kavanaugh is requested to report to the cockpit immediately upon arrival, the message read. When Brenda arrived at the cockpit door, her usual confidence had diminished considerably. "You wanted to see me, Captain?" she asked. Captain Harrington's expression was grave. "Brenda, I've been notified there was an incident in first class involving a minor passenger." "I can explain," she began defensively. "I'm not asking for explanations right now," he interrupted. "Ground operations has informed me that we had a VIP on board, and there's an incident report being filed. Regional Director Carter is waiting at the gate. All flight attendants are to remain on board until all passengers have deplaned." "A VIP?" Brenda asked, her voice losing some of its certainty. "Who?" "They didn't specify," the captain replied. "Just that it's someone significant to the company." Brenda's mind raced through the passenger list. The businessman in 6B who'd been demanding in particular about his cocktail. The former celebrity in 4C who'd been quietly reading throughout the flight. It never occurred to her that the VIP might be connected to the boy she had struck. As passengers prepared to deplane, the lead flight attendant made an announcement requesting all crew members to take positions for deplaning. Brenda was stationed at the main exit door, forcing a smile as passengers filed past her. Stephanie stood at the opposite exit, watching Brenda with a mixture of concern and disapproval. The deplaning process proceeded normally until only a handful of passengers remained on board. Terrell purposely waited, allowing Jamal to gather his things without rush. They were the last passengers to approach the exit where Brenda stood. When Brenda saw Jamal approaching with the well-dressed man from 5C beside him, her practiced smile faltered. Terrell stopped directly in front of her, his expression unreadable. "Thank you for flying with us today, sir," she said automatically, trying to maintain professionalism. "Thank you," Terrell replied pleasantly. It was quite an educational experience. Something in his tone made Brenda pale slightly, but before she could respond, the scene at the jet bridge caught her attention. A woman in a sharp Skyline Airways executive uniform stood waiting, flanked by two administrative assistants. When she spotted Terrell, her professional demeanor briefly gave way to relief. "Mr. Washington. Thank goodness you've arrived safely," she called out. "We have the conference room prepared as requested." Brenda's eyes widened as the connection suddenly became clear. She looked from the executive to Terrell, then down to Jamal, understanding dawning with horrible clarity. "You're Terrell Washington?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Terrell looked at his son. "Jamal, would you like to tell this flight attendant who we are?" Jamal considered the question, looking at the woman who had humiliated him in front of an entire cabin. For a moment, it seemed he might revel in revealing his father's identity, but then he shook his head. "No thanks, Dad. Let's just go to Disney World." The simple dignity of his son's response filled Terrell with pride. He nodded respectfully and guided Jamal forward to greet Alicia Carter, the regional director who had been with Skyline Airways for 8 years. "Mr. Washington, I came as soon as I received the message," Alicia said, her voice professional but concerned. "Is everything all right?" "Not exactly, Alicia. We need to discuss an incident that occurred during the flight," Terrell replied. "Is the conference room private?" "Absolutely, sir. It's ready in the Skyline Executive Lounge." Brenda watched this exchange with growing horror, rooted to her spot at the aircraft door. Captain Harrington appeared beside her. "Brenda, you're requested to join them in the conference room after deplaning procedures are complete," he informed her quietly. "Who exactly is he?" she whispered urgently. The captain looked at her with disbelief. "Terrell Washington. The new owner of Skyline Airways. The entire airline was acquired by Washington Transportation Group 3 months ago." He shook his head. "How did you not know this?" Brenda felt physically ill. "And the boy?" "His son, apparently." The captain studied her face. "What exactly happened during this flight, Brenda?" She couldn't bring herself to answer. 20 minutes later, Brenda entered the Skyline Executive Lounge, a space normally reserved for the airline's highest-tier frequent flyers and corporate partners. She was directed to a private conference room where Terrell, Jamal, Alicia Carter, and Stephanie Jackson were already seated. 2 other executives had joined them via video conference on a large screen. Brenda took the only empty seat, directly across from Terrell and Jamal. Despite her 15 years of service, she had never felt more out of place. "Thank you for joining us, Ms. Kavanaugh," Terrell said, his tone businesslike. "I believe you've already met my son, Jamal." Brenda nodded stiffly, unable to make eye contact with the boy. "I should introduce myself properly," Terrell continued. "I'm Terrell Washington, CEO of Washington Transportation Group and, as of 3 months ago, the owner of Skyline Airways. I've been flying regularly on our routes, observing operations before implementing any major changes." He paused. Today's flight was particularly enlightening. Alicia Carter looked profoundly uncomfortable. "Mr. Washington, on behalf of Skyline Airways, I want to express our deepest," Terrell raised a hand to pause her apology. "Before we continue, I think it's important for everyone to fully understand what happened." He placed his phone on the table and pressed play on the video he had recorded. The footage was damning. From Terrell's vantage point several rows back, the video clearly showed Jamal's accidental bump during turbulence, Brenda's disproportionate reaction, and the shocking moment when she struck him and ordered him back to economy, where he belonged. The audio was crystal clear, capturing every word and the gasps of nearby passengers. When the video ended, silence filled the room. Alicia Carter looked physically ill. The executives on the video screen were equally stunned. "Ms. Kavanaugh," Terrell said evenly, "would you like to explain your actions?" Brenda shifted uncomfortably in her seat, the conference room suddenly feeling too small and too warm. All eyes were on her, Terrell's steady gaze, Jamal's hurt expression, Alicia Carter's look of professional horror, and Stephanie's quiet disapproval. Brenda began, her voice catching. She cleared her throat and tried again. "It was a misunderstanding. We were experiencing turbulence, which creates a safety hazard when passengers are moving about the cabin. I was concerned about about your son's safety." Terrell raised an eyebrow. "A concern for safety led you to physically strike a child passenger?" "He startled me," Brenda insisted, grasping for justification. "In my 15 years of service, I've seen numerous security situations. When someone unauthorized enters restricted areas? Terrell interrupted. "Ms. Kavanaugh, my son was a ticketed first-class passenger using the first-class lavatory. What exactly was restricted about that? He didn't look like..." Brenda stopped herself, realizing the dangerous territory she was entering. "He didn't look like what, Ms. Kavanaugh?" Terrell pressed. "Please, finish your thought." The executives on the video screen leaned forward, equally interested in her response. Brenda attempted to redirect. "His attire didn't match our typical first-class passenger profile. In my experience, young people in casual clothing wandering during turbulence are usually from economy trying to access first-class amenities. So you profiled my son based on his age and clothing," Terrell stated flatly. "And when he told you he was assigned to seat 2A, you chose not to believe him." "I didn't have the passenger manifest memorized," Brenda defended weakly. Terrell turned to Stephanie. "Ms. Jackson, in your experience, is it standard procedure to physically strike passengers who may be in the wrong cabin?" "Absolutely not, sir," Stephanie replied firmly. "Our protocols for passengers in the wrong cabin involve polite redirection and, if necessary, checking their boarding pass. Physical contact is never authorized except in security emergencies as a last resort, and only by trained personnel." Alicia Carter, who had been taking notes furiously, looked up. "Mr. Washington, I want to assure you that this behavior is completely contrary to our company policies and training. Ms. Kavanaugh's actions today represent a serious violation of our standards. This isn't just about today, Stephanie interjected unexpectedly. All heads turned toward her. What do you mean? Terrell asked. Stephanie straightened in her chair, visibly gathering courage. With respect, sir, this isn't an isolated incident. I've observed a mess. Kavanaugh applying different standards of service based on passengers' appearance or perceived status for the 3 years we've worked together. Brenda's face flushed with anger. That's absolutely untrue. I treat all passengers with the same level of professionalism. I've seen you question black passengers' first-class tickets multiple times, Stephanie continued steadily. I've watched you offer full drink selections to some passengers while limiting options for others. I've noticed how you verify IDs for alcohol service more frequently with certain passengers than others. That's your perception, Brenda shot back. You're making this about race when it's about procedure and protocol. Is slapping a child part of Skyline's protocol? Jamal asked suddenly, his young voice cutting through the adult tensions. The room fell silent. It was the first time he had spoken since the meeting began. Terrell placed a supportive hand on his son's shoulder. Would you like to tell everyone how this made you feel, Jamal? Jamal nodded, sitting up straighter. I felt embarrassed. Everyone was watching. I didn't do anything wrong, I just needed to use the bathroom and the plane bumped. I told her I was in first class, but she didn't listen. His voice remained steady despite the emotion behind his words. It felt like she decided I didn't belong there before even knowing who I was. Terrell turned to the executives on screen. Over the past 3 months, I've been quietly reviewing customer feedback across all our routes. Would you be surprised to know we've received 27 complaints about discriminatory treatment on our flights in that time period alone? The executives looked genuinely shocked. 6 of those complaints specifically named Ms. Kavanaugh, Terrell continued. None were adequately addressed beyond form letter responses. Why is that? One of the executives, Howard Jenkins from Customer Relations, fumbled with papers off-screen. We received thousands of customer comments, Mr. Washington. Without specific details, I can't address why those particular. I have the details, Terrell interrupted, sliding a folder across the table to Alicia. This is a systemic issue, not an isolated incident. Alicia quickly scanned the documents, her expression growing increasingly troubled. Mr. Washington, she said finally, in light of this evidence and today's incident, I believe immediate termination is the appropriate course of action. She turned to Brenda. Ms. Kavanaugh, your employment with Skyline Airways is, wait, Terrell interrupted, surprising everyone in the room. That's not what I want. Brenda's relief was visible but short-lived as Terrell continued. Firing one employee doesn't solve a systemic problem. It just buries it. He leaned forward, hands clasped on the table. I didn't buy this airline just as a business investment. I bought it because transportation, moving freely through the world, is fundamental to human dignity. He looked directly at Brenda. Do you know what it's like to teach your child that some people will assume he doesn't belong in certain spaces? To prepare him for being questioned, followed, or suspected simply because of how he looks? Brenda remained silent, but discomfort showed on her face. What happened today is happening every day across this country. Firing you might feel satisfying in the moment, but it won't create lasting change. Terrell's voice was calm but resolute. Instead, I'm announcing the immediate implementation of a comprehensive anti-racism training program across all Skyline Airways operations. The executives on screen shifted uncomfortably. Ms. Kavanaugh, you have a choice, Terrell continued. You can resign today, or you can be part of this change. You'll be demoted from first-class service temporarily, but you'll have the opportunity to participate in developing this training program, sharing your experience as part of the solution. The room fell silent as everyone processed this unexpected direction. What would you do if you were in Terrell's position? Would you have fired Brenda immediately, or do you think his approach of systemic change is more effective? Comment number 1 if you believe immediate termination was warranted, or number 2 if you support Terrell's decision to address the larger issue. This pivotal moment raises an important question: how do we transform individual incidents of discrimination into opportunities for broader change? Like and subscribe if you want to see more stories about leadership in challenging situations. Now, as the tension builds in that conference room, what do you think Brenda will choose? Will she accept responsibility and become part of the solution, or will she resist this opportunity for growth? Let's continue with our story and find out. 2 weeks after the incident, Skyline Airways headquarters in Atlanta buzzed with an undercurrent of tension. What had begun as a single confrontation on a flight to Orlando had catalyzed changes that rippled throughout the entire organization. In a glass-walled conference room, Terrell stood before a slide presentation titled, "Building an Inclusive Skyline, Phase 1 Implementation." The comprehensive training program begins next week, he explained to his executive team. Every employee, from baggage handlers to pilots, will participate. No exceptions. Among the 20 executives seated around the table, several shifted uncomfortably. Howard Jenkins, the longtime VP of Customer Relations, cleared his throat. "Mr. Washington, while we all support the general concept, the financial impact of pulling staff for training during our peak season is concerning. Perhaps a phased approach, this isn't optional, Howard," Terrell replied firmly. "We've calculated the costs, including temporary staffing adjustments. Yes, it's an investment, but considering the potential liability of not addressing these issues, it's also risk management." In the staff lounge of Orlando International Airport, Brenda Kavanaugh sat alone, scrolling through her phone. Her once pristine uniform now bore the single stripe of a standard economy cabin attendant rather than the 2 stripes she'd worn proudly for 8 years. Though grateful to still have a job, her resentment grew daily. "Mind if I join you?" Brenda looked up to see Harold Matthews, the senior VP of operations, standing beside her table. At 62, Harold was part of the old guard at Skyline, having worked his way up from baggage handling over a 40-year career. "Of course, sir," Brenda replied, surprised by the attention from such a high-ranking executive. Harold sat down, glancing around to ensure they wouldn't be overheard. "Tough break, what happened with the Washington kid? Bit extreme, demoting you after all your years of service." Brenda felt a surge of validation. "Thank you for saying that. I feel like everyone's treating me like a criminal." "Between us," Harold said, lowering his voice, "this whole training program is an overreaction. One incident, and suddenly we're being told everything we've been doing for decades is wrong." "Exactly." Brenda agreed eagerly. "I made one mistake." "Was it even a mistake?" Harold interrupted. "You were following security protocols as you understood them. Now we're all being forced to sit through sensitivity training because the new owner's son had a bad experience." Across the airport, Stephanie Jackson was experiencing a very different reception from her colleagues. As she entered the flight attendant's briefing room for her pre-flight meeting, conversations hushed, and several people avoided eye contact. "Morning," she greeted everyone, trying to maintain normalcy. Lisa Brennan, a flight attendant who had been friendly with Stephanie for years, barely nodded in acknowledgement. Another colleague whispered something to his companion, both glancing at Stephanie with unveiled hostility. "Is there a problem?" Stephanie finally asked, the tension becoming unbearable. "You tell us," Lisa replied coldly. "Must be nice being the CEO's new favorite." Was throwing Brenda under the bus worth the gold star? "I didn't throw anyone under the bus," Stephanie defended. "I told the truth about what I've observed." "You broke the code," another flight attendant chimed in. "We stick together. That's how it works. Even when someone's behavior is harmful." Stephanie challenged. "That's not loyalty, that's complicity." The room temperature seemed to drop another 10 degrees as her colleagues turned away, making their position clear. Stephanie was now an outsider. Meanwhile, in his bedroom in their Atlanta home, Jamal Washington sat bolt upright in bed, his heart racing. The nightmare had returned, standing in a crowded place while everyone stared at him, whispers of, "He doesn't belong here," growing louder until they became a roar. In the dream, he kept insisting he had a right to be there, but no one believed him until the moment of humiliation when he was physically pushed away. A soft knock on his door preceded his father's concerned face. "Another bad dream?" Jamal nodded, embarrassed by the tears he couldn't hold back. "I thought they would stop by now." Terrell sat on the edge of the bed. "Sometimes our minds need time to process difficult experiences. It doesn't mean you're not strong." "I don't want to go back to school tomorrow," Jamal admitted. "Tyler saw the video online and told everyone about it." Terrell frowned. "The video is online? How is that possible?" "Someone on the plane must have recorded it too," Jamal explained. "Tyler said his mom showed him." This was an unexpected complication. Terrell had been careful to keep the incident contained within the company, partly to protect Jamal from exactly this kind of exposure. The fact that footage had leaked to social media meant the situation was escalating beyond his control. The next morning, Terrell faced another challenge during the Skyline Airways board meeting. Several board members had requested an emergency session to discuss the recent changes in company policy. "The training program alone will cost $4 million, board member Victoria Chambers argued, pointing to the budget projections. "Add the potential loss of bookings if we're perceived as having a discrimination problem, and we're looking at a significant financial impact." "We already have a discrimination problem," Terrell countered. "The question is whether we address it or ignore it until we face a class action lawsuit." "With all due respect," another board member interjected, "one incident with your son, while unfortunate, hardly constitutes a pattern requiring this level of response." Terrell maintained his composure with practiced skill. "I've provided each of you with 3 years of customer complaint data showing a clear pattern of discriminatory treatment. This isn't about my son." His experience merely brought to light an existing issue. As the board meeting continued, Brenda Kavanaugh was meeting with an attorney in a small office near the airport. "So you believe you were demoted because of this single incident?" the lawyer asked, reviewing her employment records. "Yes," Brenda confirmed. 15 years of exemplary service, and one misunderstanding with a passenger who turned out to be the owner's son, and suddenly I'm painted as a racist." The lawyer made notes. "And you believe you were following company security protocols?" "Absolutely. We're trained to be vigilant about passengers who might be in the wrong cabin, especially during turbulence when safety is at risk." "Did you follow the specific protocol for such situations?" Brenda hesitated. "Well, there's a procedure to check boarding passes, but in the moment, did you physically strike the passenger?" the lawyer asked directly. "It wasn't a strike exactly," Brenda hedged. "More of a reflexive gesture when he bumped into me." The lawyer looked skeptical but continued making notes. "And you've been asked to participate in developing this new training program?" "Yes, but it's humiliating. They want me to basically stand up and confess to being prejudiced, which I am absolutely not." Meanwhile, the story was gaining traction online. An aviation blog had published an anonymous letter titled, "Reverse Discrimination at Skyline Airways," claiming that the airline was sacrificing safety protocols on the altar of political correctness. The comment section filled with debate, some supporting the increased focus on equity, others claiming it was an overreaction to a single incident. What the public didn't know was that Harold Matthews had been quietly encouraging this narrative. As Senior VP of Operations, he had spent decades building Skyline's procedures and took personal pride in the airline's traditional approach. The sudden changes threatened not just his professional legacy but his worldview. In his corner office, Harold placed a call to a journalist contact. "I'm sending you some internal documents about passenger complaints at Skyline. You'll notice many were dismissed for lack of evidence. That's not negligence. It's because they were investigated and found to be without merit. What Harold didn't mention was that he had personally shelved many of those complaints without proper investigation, especially those involving claims of discriminatory treatment. As these forces of resistance mobilized, Stephanie was conducting her own research. Having faced backlash from colleagues, she became more determined to understand the full scope of the problem. During her layover in Chicago, she reached out to flight attendants of color from other airlines. "This isn't unique to Skyline," explained Darius Williams, a flight attendant with 20 years of experience across 3 major carriers. "Every airline has these issues. The difference is whether management is willing to acknowledge them. How do you document patterns when individual incidents seem isolated?" Stephanie asked. "That's the key," Darius replied. "They're never really isolated. Start tracking everything: dates, flights, specific behaviors. Look for commonalities in how certain passengers are treated. And find allies willing to corroborate what you observe." Armed with this advice, Stephanie began systematically reviewing past flight logs and crew assignments. A pattern emerged: complaints about discriminatory treatment spiked on flights where Brenda and several other specific crew members were working. More tellingly, these complaints were consistently routed to Harold Matthews' department, where they disappeared into administrative black holes. When Stephanie brought these findings to Alicia Carter, the regional director was both concerned and cautious. "This suggests a much deeper problem than one flight attendant," Alicia observed. "But we need to be careful. Harold Matthews has allies throughout the company, including on the board. So we just ignore it?" Stephanie asked, frustrated. "No," Alicia replied thoughtfully. "We bring it directly to Terrell Washington. But we need irrefutable evidence." As these undercurrents of resistance and investigation flowed beneath the surface, the Washington household was dealing with more immediate concerns. Jamal had become withdrawn at school, and his teacher had called Terrell with concerns. "He's a bright student," Mrs. Hathaway explained, "but he's been quiet lately, not participating in discussions." "He's been through a difficult experience," Terrell explained without elaborating. "Whatever it is," she continued, "he's channeling some of it into his writing. He submitted an essay about racial profiling that was quite powerful. I thought you should know he's processing something significant." That evening, Terrell found Jamal in his room, working intently on his laptop. "Your teacher called," Terrell said, sitting beside him. "She mentioned your essay." Jamal looked up nervously. "Am I in trouble?" "Not at all. I'd like to read it, if you're willing to share." Jamal hesitated before turning the screen toward his father. The title read, "When They Decide You Don't Belong, A Personal Experience with Racial Profiling." As Terrell read the thoughtful, articulate words of his 11-year-old son, he felt a complex mixture of pride and sadness. Jamal had transformed his humiliation into insight, his pain into purpose. The essay concluded with a powerful statement. "The most important thing isn't how others see you, but how you see yourself. No one can take away your right to exist in any space where you belong." Terrell looked at his son with new appreciation. "This is excellent, Jamal. Would you consider sharing it more widely?" "What do you mean?" Jamal asked cautiously. "I mean, would you be willing to help others understand these experiences? Sometimes people need to hear directly from those affected to truly understand." Jamal considered this carefully. "Like at your company?" "Exactly. Your perspective could be valuable in helping people understand why these changes matter." For the first time in weeks, Jamal's expression brightened with purpose. "I think I'd like that." As father and son discussed possibilities, neither was aware that across town, Brenda Kavanaugh and Harold Matthews were meeting secretly at a quiet restaurant, planning their own counter-strategy. "The lawsuit is just leverage," Harold explained, cutting his steak. "Once the board sees the potential negative publicity, they'll pressure Washington to back down on these changes. And I'll get my position back?" Brenda asked hopefully. Harold smiled with confidence that didn't reach his eyes. That and more. We're not just fighting for your job, Brenda. We're fighting for the soul of this airline. 3 days later, the headline splashed across aviation news sites: Skyline Airways flight attendant files discrimination lawsuit against airline. The article detailed Brenda's claims of unfair treatment and reverse discrimination, following what she characterized as a minor misunderstanding with a passenger. Though Jamal wasn't named directly due to his age, the article mentioned that the passenger was the son of the airline's new owner, making the connection clear to anyone who had been following the story. Terrell read the article in his home office, his expression unreadable. He had anticipated resistance to the changes he was implementing, but the public lawsuit escalated the situation beyond internal company politics. This was now a public relations battle that could affect Skyline's reputation and bottom line. His phone rang. Alicia Carter. "I assume you've seen the news," she said without preamble. "I have," Terrell confirmed. "Not surprising, but disappointing." "There's more," Alicia continued. "Stephanie Jackson has uncovered something you need to see. Can we meet privately?" "Not at headquarters. My home office in 2 hours," Terrell decided. "Bring Stephanie and whatever evidence she's found." After hanging up, Terrell reached out to Anthony Douglas, a prominent civil rights attorney he had worked with on previous business matters. "Anthony, I need your counsel on a situation that's developing at Skyline." While Terrell marshaled his legal resources, across town, Jamal was facing his own challenges at Westlake Middle School. The viral video had made him unwillingly famous among his classmates, resulting in a mixture of uncomfortable attention and awkward avoidance. "Is it true your dad owns an airline?" asked Derek, a classmate who had never spoken to him before. "Yes," Jamal answered simply, trying to eat his lunch in peace. "So are you like, super rich now?" another boy pressed. Jamal shrugged. "My dad works hard. I'm just a regular kid." "Didn't look regular in that video," Derek continued. "That lady smacked you good." Jamal felt his cheeks burn with humiliation as several kids snickered. Before he could respond, a voice cut through the chatter. "Leave him alone, Derek." It was Zoe Chen, one of the most respected students in their grade. "How would you feel if something embarrassing happened to you and everyone kept bringing it up?" Derek rolled his eyes but moved on, taking his followers with him. Zoe sat next to Jamal. "Thanks," he said quietly. "People are stupid sometimes," she replied matter-of-factly. "My mom's a flight attendant. Not for Skyline, but for United. She says what happened to you happens all the time, just usually not on camera." For the first time in weeks, Jamal felt understood. "Really?" "Yeah. She's Chinese American and gets all kinds of comments from passengers assuming she can't speak English well, even though she was born in Cleveland." Zoe took a bite of her apple. "Anyway, I thought what your dad is doing sounds cool. My mom read about the training program. She wishes her airline would do something similar." This conversation planted a seed in Jamal's mind. By the time his father picked him up after school, the seed had germinated into an idea. "Dad," he said as they drove home, "what if it's not just about Skyline?" Terrell glanced at his son curiously. "What do you mean?" "I met this girl today whose mom is a flight attendant for United. She deals with the same stuff. What if we made the training program available to other airlines too?" Terrell considered this thoughtfully. "That's actually brilliant, Jamal. Instead of keeping it proprietary, we could create an industry standard." He smiled at his son with pride. "You're thinking like a true business innovator." When they arrived home, Alicia and Stephanie were waiting in the driveway. Once settled in Terrell's home office, Stephanie opened her laptop. "I've been tracking passenger complaints across all routes for the past 3 years," she explained, pulling up a spreadsheet. "There's a clear pattern of discriminatory incidents, but most importantly, there's a pattern in how those complaints were handled, or rather, not handled. She clicked through to another document. These are internal emails showing that Harold Matthews specifically directed certain types of complaints to be classified as customer preference issues rather than potential discrimination cases. This effectively buried them. Terrell studied the evidence. How many complaints are we talking about? 237 documented cases over 3 years, Stephanie replied. And those are just the ones passengers took the time to formally report. The real smoking gun is this, Alicia added, sliding a folder across the desk. An internal memo from Harold to senior cabin crew, including Brenda, outlining what he called passenger profile management. Essentially providing different levels of service based on how passengers present themselves. Terrell opened the folder and read the memo with growing disbelief. Though carefully worded to avoid explicitly mentioning race, the guidance included phrases like, passengers who appear out of place in premium cabins may require additional verification, and, maintaining the exclusive atmosphere expected by our high-value customers. This is textbook institutional discrimination, he said finally. Coded language to justify profiling. Exactly, Stephanie agreed. And based on crew assignments, I can identify at least 8 flight attendants who consistently followed these unofficial guidelines. Terrell sat back, processing this information. So we're not dealing with one biased employee, but a systemic issue that's been actively encouraged by senior leadership. Yes, Alicia confirmed. And I believe Harold is behind Brenda's lawsuit. He's using her as the public face of resistance while protecting his own position. As they discussed strategy, Terrell's phone rang. It was Anthony Douglas. Terrell, I've reviewed the lawsuit filing, the attorney reported. It's weak, but designed for publicity more than legal victory. However, I've also been contacted by 3 former Skyline employees who say they were pushed out after raising concerns about discriminatory practices. They're willing to go on record. The pieces were falling into place. By the time Alicia and Stephanie left, a counter-strategy was taking shape, not just to defend against Brenda's lawsuit, but to address the deeper rot within Skyline's culture. The next morning, Terrell convened an emergency meeting with key allies from his executive team. Present were Alicia Carter, Regional Director, James Wilson, newly appointed Chief Diversity Officer, Maria Gonzalez, General Counsel, and via secure video link, Anthony Douglas. We're not just fighting a PR battle, Terrell explained. We're addressing decades of institutionalized practices that have harmed both our passengers and our employees. The legal strategy is two-pronged, Anthony elaborated. First, we defend against Kavanaugh's lawsuit with evidence of the incident and the company's reasonable response. Second, we prepare for possible action against Matthews for creating a discriminatory work environment. What about public perception? James Wilson asked. The story is gaining traction in traditional and social media, often framed as a personal vendetta because your son was involved. That's where Phase 2 comes in, Terrell replied. We're expanding beyond Skyline to create an industry-wide initiative. I've already reached out to CEOs at 3 other airlines who have expressed interest in joining a coalition to address these issues across the industry. Maria Gonzalez nodded approvingly. That reframes the narrative from personal to systemic. Smart. There's another element, Terrell added. Jamal has written an essay about his experience that humanizes the issue without sensationalizing it. With his permission, we're going to share it as part of our educational materials. Meanwhile, the resistance was organizing its own coalition. Harold Matthews had activated his network of industry veterans, many now in leadership positions at other airlines and aviation companies. Their message was consistent: Skyline was overreacting to a single incident, potentially compromising safety procedures in favor of political correctness. Brenda became their reluctant spokesperson, appearing in a carefully choreographed interview on a business news channel. I've dedicated 15 years to ensuring passenger safety, she said, looking appropriately somber. One misunderstanding during turbulence has been weaponized to paint me as something I'm not. I'm fighting not just for my reputation, but for the standards that keep air travel safe. The interviewer, clearly sympathetic, asked leading questions that allowed Brenda to present herself as a victim of changing cultural tides rather than someone who had physically struck a child passenger. As the battle lines were drawn in the media and legal arenas, Stephanie Jackson faced increasing hostility from colleagues. Anonymous notes appeared in her locker with messages like "traitor" and "career suicide." Several crew members requested not to be scheduled on flights with her. Rather than retreating, Stephanie reached out to flight attendants from other airlines through professional networks. She was surprised by the response. Dozens of industry professionals, particularly people of color, shared similar experiences and offered support. "We're forming a flight attendants for equity group," she explained to Terrell during a progress update. "It started with just a few of us from Skyline, but now includes people from Delta, American, United, and smaller regional carriers. There's clearly an appetite for this conversation across the industry." Terrell nodded thoughtfully. "This is exactly the kind of organic movement we need, change coming from within the profession itself, not just mandated from above." As these parallel efforts advanced, Jamal's school project had evolved into something more significant. With his teacher's encouragement, he had expanded his essay into a presentation about racial profiling from a young person's perspective. When he presented it to his class, the response was powerful. Students who had previously teased him about the video now approached him with their own stories of being made to feel like they didn't belong. "Dad," Jamal said over dinner one evening, "my teacher thinks I should present at the school assembly next month. It's about community and belonging." Terrell studied his son. "That's a big audience. How do you feel about it?" "Nervous," Jamal admitted. "But also, important. Like maybe my bad experience could help other kids." Terrell felt a surge of pride. "That's the definition of leadership, son, using your challenges to create positive change for others." The next day brought a significant development. 3 passengers from the original flight contacted Skyline Airways independently, offering their eyewitness accounts of the incident. Their statements corroborated Terrell's video evidence and contradicted Brenda's claim of a minor misunderstanding. One passenger, Dr. Amelia Jordan, was particularly credible as a child psychologist. "What I witnessed was clearly inappropriate handling of a minor," her statement read. "The child was calm and articulate about his assigned seat, while the flight attendant escalated the situation unnecessarily. Physical contact with a minor passenger in this context was entirely unjustified." As these statements were being processed by Skyline's legal team, Stephanie made another discovery. Through her growing network, she obtained employment records showing that Brenda had been quietly asked to leave 2 previous airlines following similar incidents that had been settled confidentially. "This changes everything," Anthony Douglas explained when presented with the evidence. "It establishes a pattern of behavior and raises serious questions about Skyline's hiring practices and background checks." The focus was shifting from a single incident to the systems that had enabled such behavior to continue unchecked across multiple airlines. Harold Matthews, sensing the changing tide, made a desperate move. He attempted to access and delete historical complaint records from Skyline servers, not realizing that IT security had been enhanced following Terrell's acquisition of the company. The unauthorized access attempt was flagged immediately, creating a digital footprint that would prove to be Harold's undoing. As evidence mounted on multiple fronts, Terrell prepared for a crucial board meeting where the future direction of Skyline Airways would be determined once and for all. "The coalition is growing," he informed Jamal as they prepared for bed the night before the meeting. "For major airlines have now agreed to join the initiative." "Will I need to talk about what happened again?" Jamal asked. Terrell sat on the edge of his son's bed. "Only if you want to. You've already contributed so much, Jamal. I'm incredibly proud of how you've handled all of this." Jamal thought for a moment. "I want to be there. Not just as your son, but because I have something important to say." Terrell nodded, respecting his son's decision. "Then we'll face them together." As father and son prepared for the confrontation ahead, neither could have predicted the revelations that would unfold at the board meeting, revelations that would transform not just Skyline Airways, but potentially the entire aviation industry's approach to equality and inclusion. The Skyline Airways boardroom embodied corporate power, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Atlanta's skyline, a massive mahogany table that seated 20, and walls adorned with models of the airline's fleet evolution over its 60-year history. Today, that history stood at a crossroads. Terrell Washington arrived early, reviewing his presentation materials one final time. Beside him sat Jamal, dressed in a navy blazer and crisp white shirt, nervously straightening his tie. "Remember," Terrell said quietly, "just speak your truth. That's all anyone can ask of you." Jamal nodded, his expression serious beyond his 11 years. As board members filed in, the tension was palpable. Several offered polite but cool greetings to Terrell, while others openly stared at Jamal with curiosity. Harold Matthews entered last, flanked by two allies from the operations division. His confident smile faltered slightly upon seeing Jamal, but he quickly recovered, taking his seat with practiced nonchalance. Victoria Chambers, the board chairperson, called the meeting to order. "We're convened today to address the ongoing situation regarding passenger relations policies and the recent lawsuit filed against Skyline Airways." She glanced at Terrell. "Mr. Washington has requested time to present his perspective before we deliberate." "Thank you, Chairperson Chambers," Terrell began, standing. "Before I share our strategic response, I believe it's important for this board to hear directly from someone whose experience catalyzed these discussions." He turned to Jamal. "My son has asked to address you briefly." Several board members shifted uncomfortably. This was unprecedented, a child addressing the board of a major corporation. Harold Matthews cleared his throat in objection, but Victoria nodded her permission. Jamal stood, unfolding a single sheet of paper with his notes. Despite his obvious nervousness, his voice was clear and steady. "My name is Jamal Washington. I'm 11 years old. 2 months ago, I was hit by a flight attendant on one of your planes because she decided I didn't belong in first class." He paused, looking around the room. "I didn't do anything wrong. I was just trying to use the bathroom during turbulence. I told her I was in seat 2A, but she didn't believe me." The boardroom was utterly silent as Jamal continued. "That day was humiliating. For weeks afterward, I had nightmares. I was afraid to go to school because the video went viral, and everyone was talking about it." His voice grew stronger. "But then I realized something important. What happened to me happens to people who look like me every day, just usually without cameras recording it." Jamal looked directly at Harold Matthews. "Adults always tell kids to speak up when something's wrong. I'm speaking up. What happened wasn't just about me. It's about a system that teaches some people they don't belong in certain spaces. And that needs to change." He sat down, and for several moments, no one spoke. Victoria Chambers was the first to break the silence. "Thank you, Jamal," she said, her professional demeanor softened. "That took courage." Terrell placed a supportive hand on his son's shoulder before addressing the board. "As you can see, this issue transcends corporate politics or public relations. It's about fundamental human dignity." He activated the presentation screen. "Over the past 2 months, we've comprehensively reviewed Skyline's practices regarding passenger treatment. What we found was disturbing." The presentation displayed data visualizations showing complaint patterns, demographic disparities in service quality metrics, and historical trends in addressing, or failing to address, discrimination concerns. "These aren't isolated incidents," Terrell emphasized. "They represent a systemic failure that predates my acquisition of the airline." Harold Matthews interrupted. "With all due respect, Mr. Washington, every airline receives thousands of subjective complaints. Cherry-picking data to support a predetermined narrative is hardly, if I may," a new voice interjected. All heads turned as Stephanie Jackson and Anthony Douglas entered the boardroom, followed by Alicia Carter. "We apologize for the interruption," Anthony stated professionally. "But we have time-sensitive information critical to these deliberations." Victoria Chambers frowned at the interruption but nodded for them to continue. Stephanie stepped forward, placing a flash drive on the table. "This contains comprehensive evidence that discrimination complaints have been systematically buried within Skyline for years." She turned to Harold. "Specifically, Mr. Matthews has personally intervened to reclassify discrimination complaints as customer preference issues to avoid proper investigation." Harold's face flushed. "That's an outrageous accusation. As head of operations, I have discretion to categorize customer feedback appropriately." "Perhaps," Anthony agreed, "but do you also have discretion to destroy evidence?" He produced a folder. "Yesterday at 11:42 p.m., you attempted to delete historical complaint records from Skyline servers. Our IT security team has the complete access logs." Murmurs circulated around the table as board members processed this revelation. "Furthermore," Stephanie continued, "I've compiled statements from 17 former Skyline employees who were discouraged or penalized for reporting discriminatory incidents." She placed another folder on the table. 3 of them are prepared to testify that they were directly instructed by Mr. Matthews to provide different levels of service based on passengers' appearance and perceived status." The boardroom erupted in concerned conversations. Victoria Chambers banged her gavel to restore order. "These are serious allegations that require proper investigation," she stated firmly. "There's more," Anthony added. "We've obtained employment records showing that Ms. Kavanaugh was separated from 2 previous airlines following similar incidents involving minority passengers. These records were available during Skyline's hiring process but were apparently overlooked or ignored." Harold Matthews stood abruptly. "This is a coordinated attack on my reputation. I've devoted 40 years to this airline, and in those 40 years," Terrell interrupted calmly, "you've created a culture where treating certain passengers as second-class citizens became normalized. Where flight attendants like Brenda Kavanaugh were protected rather than held accountable." The evidence was damning. As board members reviewed the documents, the atmosphere in the room shifted perceptibly. What had begun as skepticism toward Terrell's overreaction was transforming into concern about potential legal liability. Lawrence Thompson, the board's legal advisor, spoke for the first time. "These records indicate potential violations of federal anti-discrimination laws. If passengers were to organize a class action lawsuit based on this evidence." He didn't need to finish the thought. The financial implications were clear to everyone in the room. Victoria Chambers turned to Terrell. "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Washington?" "Not what you might expect," Terrell replied. "I'm not here to demand firings or assign blame, though accountability is necessary." He activated the next slide in his presentation. "I'm proposing the most comprehensive anti-discrimination initiative in aviation history. Not just for Skyline, but as an industry standard." The presentation outlined a multifaceted approach. Revised training protocols, transparent complaint handling, independent auditing of service quality across demographic groups, and industry-wide sharing of best practices. "For major competitors have already expressed interest in joining this coalition," Terrell explained. "This isn't just about fixing Skyline, it's about transforming the passenger experience across the entire industry." Board member Michael Liu, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. "While I appreciate the moral imperative, what's the business case for this investment?" Terrell nodded, anticipating the question. 3 points. First, legal liability. The evidence suggests we're sitting on a potential class action nightmare. Second, competitive advantage. Being the leader in equitable service attracts the increasingly diverse traveling public. Finally, operational efficiency. Inconsistent service standards create confusion and reduce productivity. As the presentation concluded, Victoria called for a brief recess to allow the board to digest the information. During the break, Harold Matthews approached Terrell in the hallway outside. "This isn't over," he said quietly, his voice tense with suppressed anger. "You may have convinced them today, but you're destroying everything we built." Terrell met his gaze steadily. "What you built included systems that harmed people like my son. It's not destruction to fix what's broken. It's progress." When the board reconvened, the shift in dynamics was evident. Victoria Chambers addressed Terrell directly. "The board has reviewed your proposals and the supporting evidence. While we will need time to evaluate the full implementation plan, we are unanimous in supporting the principles behind this initiative." She turned to Harold. "We are equally unanimous in finding the evidence of records tampering and complaint suppression deeply troubling. Mr. Matthews, you are placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation." Harold stood, his face red with indignation. "After 40 years of service, this is how you treat loyalty? Because one man buys the airline and suddenly decides to rewrite all the rules?" "No," Victoria corrected firmly. "Because the rules you've been following aren't acceptable in today's world, or in any world where fairness matters." As Harold stormed out, the board turned to the practical matters of implementing Terrell's vision. Committees were formed, budgets discussed, and timelines established. Throughout it all, Jamal sat quietly observing, witnessing how systems could change when people of courage stood firm. After the meeting, as Terrell and Jamal walked to their car, Anthony Douglas caught up with them. "There's been a development with Brenda Kavanaugh," he reported. "She's requested a private meeting with both of you." Terrell raised an eyebrow. "For what purpose?" She didn't specify, but her attorney indicated she may be willing to withdraw the lawsuit under certain conditions. Terrell looked down at Jamal. "That's not my decision alone. What do you think, son?" Jamal considered the question with surprising maturity. "I think we should hear what she has to say." As they drove home, Terrell reflected on how a moment of injustice had catalyzed a movement for change that now extended far beyond their personal experience. The road ahead would not be easy, institutional change never was, but for the first time, he felt confident that Skyline Airways was flying in the right direction. "Dad," Jamal said as they pulled into their driveway, "do you think she'll apologize?" "Brenda?" Terrell considered the question. "I don't know. People who've been doing the wrong thing for a long time sometimes find it very hard to admit they were wrong." Jamal nodded thoughtfully. "I hope she does. Not for me, but for her. It must be hard carrying around that much wrongness inside you." Terrell marveled at his son's capacity for empathy, even towards someone who had hurt him. It was a reminder that sometimes the greatest wisdom came from the youngest voices, if only the world would listen. 6 months passed, bringing autumn to Atlanta and significant changes to Skyline Airways. The corporate headquarters lobby, once decorated solely with model aircraft and route maps, now featured a prominent display titled "Our Commitment to Equality," showcasing the airline's new initiatives and early success metrics. Inside her modest apartment across town, Brenda Kavanaugh stood before her bathroom mirror, rehearsing what she would say. Today marked a moment she had both dreaded and, surprisingly, come to see as necessary, her scheduled meeting with Jamal Washington. The past half-year had transformed her life in ways she never anticipated. After the board meeting revelations, her lawsuit had collapsed when her own attorney recommended withdrawal, citing the overwhelming evidence against her position. With her legal options exhausted and her professional reputation in tatters, Brenda had faced a crossroads. What followed was an unexpected journey of self-examination. At first, she had clung to self-justification, blaming everyone but herself. But gradually, through the mandatory counseling sessions that were conditions of her continued employment, Brenda began confronting uncomfortable truths about her behavior and the biases that had shaped it. "I was raised to believe certain people belonged in certain places," she admitted during one particularly difficult therapy session. "I never questioned why I felt so strongly about maintaining those boundaries." Her therapist, Dr. Renee Jordan, had challenged her gently but persistently. The beliefs we absorb as children feel like absolute truth until we examine them. The question is whether you're willing to consider that what you were taught might be harmful, both to others and to yourself. That question lingered with Brenda, compelling her to reflect on countless interactions throughout her career. How many passengers had she judged based on appearance rather than their ticket? How many times had she provided different levels of service based on assumptions about who belonged in premium cabins? The most difficult realization was that she had struck a child, an act that violated not just professional standards but basic human decency. No amount of justification could erase that fact. 3 months into her rehabilitation program, Brenda had made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She requested permission to help develop training materials for Skyline's anti-discrimination program, offering her own experience as a case study in how biases manifest in customer service. "I believe I can provide valuable insight precisely because I failed so completely," she wrote in her application. "I understand the thought patterns and justifications that lead to discriminatory behavior." Today's meeting with Jamal represented another step in her redemption journey, one she had requested herself, despite the discomfort it would bring. Across town at Skyline headquarters, Stephanie Jackson stepped into her new office. The plaque on her door read, "Director, Passenger Advocacy and Inclusion," a position created specifically to address the issues she had helped bring to light. The past 6 months had been challenging but rewarding. After the board meeting revelations, Harold Matthews had been terminated for cause, his attempted evidence tampering providing clear grounds for dismissal. Several of his closest allies had resigned in solidarity, while others distanced themselves, claiming ignorance of his actions. With Harold's departure, the resistance to change largely collapsed. Stephanie, once ostracized by many colleagues, found herself increasingly respected for her courage. The Flight Attendants for Equity group she had formed now included hundreds of members across multiple airlines, becoming an influential voice in industry discussions. Stephanie called a voice from the doorway. It was Alicia Carter, recently promoted to Vice President of Customer Experience. The quarterly metrics just came in. Discrimination complaints are down 62% compared to last year. Stephanie smiled, feeling a surge of professional pride. That's significant progress, but we still have work to do. What about the passenger satisfaction scores? Up across all demographic groups, Alicia confirmed. Most notably among minorities traveling in premium cabins. And the training program completion rates? 97% of staff have completed the initial modules. The remaining 3% are on approved leave. Alicia leaned against the doorframe. By the way, 3 more airlines have joined the coalition. Terrell's vision for an industry-wide standard is becoming reality. Across the building, Terrell Washington prepared for his meeting with Brenda and Jamal. The past 6 months had been among the most demanding of his career, balancing the operational challenges of running an airline with the ambitious transformation initiative he had launched. The industry response had been mixed initially. Some competitors dismissed Skyline's efforts as publicity-seeking after a PR crisis. Others watched cautiously from the sidelines. But as preliminary data showed improved customer satisfaction and employee retention, interest grew. Now, 7 major airlines had joined the Equitable Aviation Coalition, adopting shared standards and best practices. Most gratifying for Terrell was witnessing Skyline's internal culture shift. Resistance gave way to acceptance, then to active engagement as employees at all levels contributed ideas for improvement. The changes weren't merely cosmetic, they were becoming embedded in the organization's DNA. "Mr. Washington," his assistant called through the intercom. "Ms. Kavanaugh has arrived. Your son is already in the conference room." "Thank you," Terrell replied, gathering his thoughts before heading to what promised to be an emotionally charged meeting. The conference room was intentionally small and informal, comfortable chairs around a round table, nothing to suggest power dynamics or corporate hierarchy. Jamal sat quietly, taller than 6 months ago, his expression thoughtful as he waited. Terrell placed a supportive hand on his son's shoulder. "Remember, You can end this meeting at any time if you feel uncomfortable. Jamal nodded confidently. I'm okay, Dad. I want to hear what she has to say. When Brenda entered, the changes in her were immediately apparent. Gone was the defensive posture and superior expression. She appeared more grounded, making eye contact with both Washingtons as she took her seat. Thank you both for agreeing to meet with me, she began, her voice steady despite her obvious nervousness. Especially you, Jamal. I know this can't be easy. Jamal remained silent, waiting. I've spent months thinking about what happened on that flight, Brenda continued. At first, I made excuses, the turbulence, airline protocols, security concerns. But eventually, I had to face the truth. She took a deep breath. I judged you based on how you looked. I decided you didn't belong in first class because you didn't fit my mental image of who should be there. She looked directly at Jamal. When you told me you were assigned to seat 2A, I chose not to believe you. And then I did something inexcusable, I struck you. There is absolutely no justification for that action, and I am deeply, truly sorry. The room fell silent. Jamal studied her face, searching for sincerity. Why did you decide I didn't belong there? He asked finally, his young voice steady. Brenda didn't flinch from the question. Because I had assumptions about what first-class passengers should look like. When I saw a young black boy in casual clothes, those assumptions took over. She paused. I've had to confront some ugly truths about myself these past months. Beliefs I never questioned because they were so normal in my upbringing. Do you still think that way? Jamal pressed. I'm working on it every day, Brenda answered honestly. Changing thought patterns that have been in place for decades isn't instant. But I'm committed to that change. Terrell, who had remained silent, finally spoke. Why did you request this meeting, Miss Cavanaugh? 2 reasons, she replied. First, to apologize directly to Jamal. Words can't undo what I did, but acknowledging the harm is important. She turned back to Jamal. The second reason is to ask for your input on the training materials I'm helping develop. Your perspective would be invaluable. Jamal looked surprised. You want my help? Yes. The program needs to include the voices of those who've experienced discrimination firsthand. She added, only if you're comfortable, of course. You've already contributed enough by sharing your story. Jamal glanced at his father, who nodded supportively, before turning back to Brenda. I'll think about it. That's more than fair, Brenda acknowledged. And regardless of your decision, I want you to know that your experience has already created meaningful change, including in me. As the meeting concluded, Brenda extended her hand to Jamal. After a moment's hesitation, he shook it. Not with the automatic politeness of a child following social conventions, but with the deliberate choice of someone acknowledging another's humanity despite past harm. Outside the conference room, Terrell placed an arm around his son's shoulders. You handled that with remarkable grace. How do you feel? Jamal considered the question. I believe she's really sorry. Not just sorry she got caught, but actually sorry for what she did. I think so too, Terrell agreed. Does that change anything for you? It doesn't erase what happened, Jamal said thoughtfully. But it helps knowing she's trying to be better. He looked up at his father. I think I might want to help with those training materials. Only if you're sure, Terrell cautioned. I am, Jamal affirmed. If my story can help stop this from happening to other kids, then something good came from something bad. As summer turned to fall, the transformation at Skyline Airways continued to gain momentum. The training program, now incorporating input from Jamal and other passengers who had experienced discrimination, became a model that other airlines began to adopt. Stephanie's department expanded, hiring specialists in inclusive customer service and creating accountability systems that tracked service quality across demographic groups. The data told a compelling story. When all passengers received consistently excellent service, overall satisfaction improved, driving both customer loyalty and revenue growth. Perhaps most significantly, flight attendant culture began to shift. The us versus them mentality that had characterized relationships with passengers evolved toward a more collaborative, respectful approach. Veterans like Brenda, who embraced the changes, became unexpected advocates, their personal transformations proving more persuasive than any corporate mandate. One crisp October morning, Brenda stood before 30 new flight attendant trainees, sharing her story with unflinching honesty. "I thought I was just enforcing rules," she explained. "But rules filtered through bias become weapons. That day, I didn't see a first-class passenger. I saw someone who didn't match my mental image of who belonged in that space." A trainee raised her hand. "Weren't you afraid of losing your job when you spoke up about your mistakes?" "Terrified," Brenda admitted. "But continuing to live with what I'd done, and what it revealed about me, was ultimately more frightening than facing the consequences." Across town, Jamal was experiencing his own transformation. The boy who had once been humiliated in front of an airplane full of strangers was now a sought-after speaker at his school. His presentation on racial profiling had expanded into a student-led initiative called Belonging Everywhere, addressing various forms of exclusion that young people experienced. "It's not just about race," Jamal explained to a group of 7th graders. "It's about all the ways we tell each other, you don't belong here. Sometimes with words, sometimes with actions, sometimes just with how we look at each other." Zoe Chen, who had become a close friend and co-leader of the initiative, added, "The goal isn't to make people feel guilty. It's to help everyone recognize when they're making assumptions about others based on how they look." The initiative spread to neighboring schools, attracting attention from local education officials. When a regional youth leadership conference invited Jamal to be a keynote speaker, he approached his father with the opportunity. "It's a big audience," Jamal acknowledged. "But I think I'm ready." Terrell studied his son, noting the confidence that had replaced the shame of 6 months earlier. "I think you are too." At Skyline headquarters, Terrell hosted a milestone meeting with the CEOs of the 7 airlines that had joined the Equitable Aviation Coalition. Together, they reviewed preliminary data from the first 6 months of the initiative. Across all participating airlines, discrimination complaints have decreased by an average of 53%, Terrell reported. Customer satisfaction scores have increased by 12%, with the most significant improvements among minority passengers. The financial implications are notable as well, added the CEO of Pacific Airways. "Our quarterly analysis shows increased loyalty and booking rates among diverse customer segments. This isn't just a moral imperative, it's good business." The conversation turned to next steps, expanding training programs, standardizing measurement metrics across carriers, and preparing for the upcoming industry conference where the coalition would present its findings to the broader aviation community. 6 months ago, many viewed this as a PR response to a crisis, Terrell observed. "Today, we're demonstrating that equitable service isn't just achievable, it's advantageous for everyone involved." As the executives discussed implementation challenges, Terrell reflected on how a painful moment for his son had catalyzed a movement that now extended far beyond one airline or one incident. The systems that had enabled discrimination were being dismantled not through confrontation alone, but through collaborative transformation, precisely as he had hoped. That evening, as father and son prepared dinner together, a ritual they had maintained despite increasingly busy schedules, Jamal shared news from school. "Mr. Patterson wants our Belonging Everywhere group to present at the district teachers' conference," he reported proudly. "He says adults need to hear directly from students about these issues." "That's a significant opportunity," Terrell acknowledged, chopping vegetables. "How do you feel about it?" "Good, actually," Jamal replied. 6 months ago, I just wanted to forget what happened. Now I understand that sharing my experience helps change things." Terrell paused, struck by his son's wisdom. "You know, in business school they teach elaborate theories about organizational change. But you've discovered the most fundamental truth: personal stories have power that data and policies alone never will. Jamal considered this as he set the table. Dad, do you think Skyline will really be different forever, or will things go back to how they were when people forget about what happened? It was a perceptive question that Terrell had asked himself many times. Lasting change requires institutionalizing new values and practices so they survive beyond any individual champion, he explained. That's why we've built measurement systems, accountability structures, and a coalition across multiple airlines. He placed a hand on his son's shoulder. But the most important factor is having people throughout the organization who believe in the change, not just because they're told to, but because they've internalized why it matters. Like Stephanie, Jamal observed. And maybe even Brenda now. Exactly, Terrell agreed. Change is most powerful when it comes from within. As autumn progressed, preparations intensified for the one-year anniversary of the incident that had sparked Skyline's transformation. Rather than hiding from this history, Terrell had made the bold decision to commemorate it with an industry-wide symposium on equitable aviation practices. We're turning a moment of failure into a platform for progress, he explained to his executive team. The anniversary could be something we dread, or it can be a milestone we celebrate for the positive changes it inspired. The event would bring together airline executives, flight staff, aviation regulators, and customer advocacy groups. Most significantly, Jamal would participate in a panel discussion alongside other passengers who had experienced discrimination during air travel. Are you certain about including Jamal? Alicia Carter asked privately. He's still very young to be in such a public spotlight. It's entirely his choice, Terrell assured her. He understands he can withdraw at any time. But he feels strongly about sharing his perspective. Indeed, Jamal had embraced his role with remarkable maturity. Working with Stephanie's team, he had helped review training materials and provided feedback on language that would resonate with younger passengers. His contributions proved so valuable that Skyline created a youth advisory council, inviting diverse young people to consult on initiatives affecting younger travelers. As the anniversary symposium approached, an unexpected request arrived from Brenda Kavanaugh. Now working full-time with the training program, she asked to speak at the event, not just about her personal transformation, but about the systemic changes needed throughout the industry. She's become one of our most effective advocates, Stephanie reported to Terrell. Precisely because she represents the possibility of change. When she speaks to veteran flight attendants who resist these initiatives, they listen because she once shared their perspective. The morning of the symposium dawned clear and crisp. The venue, Skyline's newly renovated training center, buzzed with activity as representatives from airlines, regulatory agencies, and media outlets gathered. In the atrium, displays highlighted the Equitable Aviation Coalition's first-year achievements, including training materials, policy revisions, and preliminary impact data. Backstage, Jamal adjusted his tie nervously. Though he had spoken to numerous school groups over the past year, addressing industry leaders represented a new level of exposure. Remember, Terrell advised, you're not speaking as my son today, but as yourself, a passenger with an important perspective to share. Jamal nodded, taking deep breaths to calm his nerves. Nearby, Brenda prepared her own notes, occasionally glancing toward Jamal with an expression that mixed respect with lingering regret. When the symposium began, Terrell took the stage to welcome attendees and frame the day's discussions. Rather than beginning with corporate achievements or industry statistics, he started with the human story at the heart of their journey. 1 year ago, my son Jamal boarded a Skyline Airways flight as an excited 11-year-old looking forward to vacation, he began. Instead, he experienced humiliation and discrimination that no child, no person, should ever face. The audience grew solemn as Terrell continued. We could have treated that incident as an isolated problem to be handled quietly. Instead, we chose to recognize it as a symptom of deeper systemic issues requiring comprehensive change. Today, we share what we've learned on that journey, not because Skyline has achieved perfection, but because progress comes through transparency and collaboration. Throughout the day, sessions addressed various dimensions of the initiative, from training methodologies to measurement metrics, from regulatory considerations to frontline implementation challenges. Industry leaders shared successes and setbacks with refreshing candor, creating an atmosphere of genuine learning rather than corporate positioning. When Jamal's panel began, the audience listened with particular attention. Alongside 3 adult passengers who had experienced discrimination on various airlines, he spoke with remarkable clarity about his experience and its aftermath. "The worst part wasn't even being hit," he explained. "It was the feeling that I didn't belong somewhere I had every right to be. That's a feeling too many people experience every day." A moderator asked how airlines could better address these issues. "Listen to people when they tell you about their experiences," Jamal answered simply. "Don't decide you know better than they do about what happened to them." The afternoon session featured Brenda Kavanaugh in a panel discussion titled, "From Resistance to Advocacy: The Human Side of Organizational Change." Without minimizing her past behavior, she articulated how deeply ingrained biases had influenced her actions and the difficult journey toward acknowledging them. "Many of us were trained in an era when professional judgment often meant applying different standards to different passengers based on how they looked," she explained. "Unlearning those patterns isn't comfortable, but it's necessary for creating truly equitable service." Her candor resonated particularly with veteran flight attendants in the audience, many of whom recognized their own unexamined assumptions in her story. As the symposium concluded, Terrell invited Jamal to join him on stage for closing remarks. Standing side by side, father and son represented both the corporate and human dimensions of the transformation they had initiated. "A year ago, an act of discrimination revealed failures in our systems, our training, and our culture," Terrell acknowledged. "Today, we're still imperfect, still learning, still evolving. But we're committed to the journey, not just because it's right, but because it creates a better experience for everyone who flies with us." He turned to Jamal. "Would you like to add anything?" Jamal stepped forward, his confidence evident despite his youth. "Sometimes bad things happen that we can't control. But we can control what we do afterward. We can stay quiet, or we can speak up. We can accept things as they are, or we can work to change them." He smiled slightly. "I'm glad we chose change." The audience rose in standing ovation, not merely out of respect for a child's courage, but in recognition of a fundamental truth: transformation begins with acknowledging harm and committing to do better, both individually and collectively. As the applause continued, Stephanie and Alicia exchanged satisfied glances from the sidelines. Brenda watched with complex emotions, her journey of accountability still ongoing but firmly on a path toward redemption. And throughout the room, industry leaders considered how these lessons might transform their own organizations. The incident on Flight SK-722 1 year earlier had lasted mere moments. Its impact would continue for years to come. In airline policies, in corporate cultures, in individual lives, and most importantly, in the experiences of countless passengers who would never know the story that had changed their journey for the better. 1 year after the industry symposium, Terrell and Jamal Washington stood in the first-class cabin of Skyline Airways Flight 1022 from Atlanta to Orlando. For both, this journey carried symbolic weight, the same route where their story had begun 2 years earlier, though under vastly different circumstances. "Nervous?" Terrell asked, noting his son's thoughtful expression as they waited to board. Jamal, now 13 and noticeably taller, shook his head. "Not nervous. Just thinking about everything that's happened since last time." The past year had brought remarkable developments. The Equitable Aviation Coalition had expanded to include 15 airlines representing over 60% of domestic passenger traffic. The training program Skyline pioneered had been recognized with the industry's highest Service Innovation Award. Most significantly, the Federal Aviation Administration had incorporated several of the coalition's recommendations into its updated passenger rights guidelines. For Jamal personally, the changes had been equally profound. The Belonging Everywhere initiative he had started at his school had grown into a national youth movement with chapters in 23 states. His keynote address at the National Education Association conference had received standing ovations from teachers committed to creating more inclusive classroom environments. Mr. Washington, Jamal, welcome aboard, greeted the lead flight attendant, a woman named Diana Powell. We're honored to have you flying with us today. As they settled into their seats, side by side this time, rather than separated as on that fateful journey, Terrell reflected on the organizational transformation that had occurred. Skyline's corporate culture had evolved from defensive resistance to proactive leadership in diversity and inclusion. Employee engagement scores had reached record highs as staff at all levels embraced the airline's renewed mission. The quantifiable results were impressive: discrimination complaints down 78%, customer satisfaction up 23% across all demographic groups. Employee retention improved by 31%. These metrics had caught the attention of industry analysts, who increasingly cited Skyline as a case study in how ethical leadership could drive business performance. "Dad, look," Jamal said quietly, nodding toward the front of the cabin. A young black girl, perhaps 9 or 10 years old, was boarding alone in first class. She wore bright pink sneakers and a t-shirt featuring a popular cartoon character. Casual attire similar to what Jamal had worn 2 years earlier. As she approached her seat, flight attendant Diana greeted her with the same warm respect she had shown all passengers. "Is this your first time flying by yourself?" Diana asked kindly. The girl nodded, a mixture of excitement and nervousness on her face. "Well, you're in excellent hands," Diana assured her. "I'll check on you throughout the flight, and if you need anything at all, just press this call button." Terrell and Jamal exchanged knowing glances, the contrast with his experience unmistakable. Small moments like this, everyday interactions that affirmed belonging rather than questioned it, represented the most meaningful measure of change. As the boarding process continued, Stephanie Jackson made her way down the aisle. Now Skyline's Senior Vice President of Customer Experience, she had asked to work this symbolic flight personally. "Everything to your satisfaction, gentlemen?" she asked, pausing at their row. "Perfect," Terrell confirmed. "How are the new international routes performing?" "Exceeding projections," Stephanie reported proudly. "Especially the Ghana and Kenya services. Turns out when you build a reputation for respectful treatment of diverse passengers, you create loyalty in emerging markets." "And the mentorship program?" Jamal asked, referring to the initiative pairing experienced flight attendants with new hires from underrepresented backgrounds. 147 successful pairings so far, Stephanie replied. Retention rates among those men's are 92% versus the industry average of 71%. As Stephanie continued through the cabin, Terrell marveled at how organizational metrics had become meaningful to his son. Jamal's journey from victim to advocate had developed alongside his growing interest in how systems and structures shaped individual experiences. The flight took off smoothly, climbing through scattered clouds into clear blue skies. Unlike that tense journey 2 years earlier, this one proceeded with relaxed professionalism. The service was attentive without being obsequious, respectful without being performative, exactly the consistent excellence that had become Skyline's new standard. Midway through the flight, Jamal noticed something that brought a smile to his face. Diana was showing the young girl in 3A how the in-flight entertainment system worked, taking extra time to ensure she felt comfortable and included. It wasn't special treatment, it was appropriate attentiveness to a young passenger traveling alone. "Remember Ms. Kavanaugh?" Jamal asked suddenly. "Of course," Terrell replied, surprised by the question. "She's still with the training program, I believe." "I was thinking about her speech at last year's symposium," Jamal continued. "About how hard it is to recognize your own biases." Terrell nodded. "That resonated with a lot of people." "I've been noticing my own," Jamal admitted. "Sometimes I catch myself making assumptions about people based on how they look or talk. I'm trying to be better about it." Terrell regarded his son with pride. Self-awareness is the first step toward change. That's true for individuals and organizations alike. As their conversation continued, neither noticed the significance of what had just occurred, a discussion about bias and belonging unfolding comfortably in the same space where bias had once manifested so painfully. The first-class cabin had transformed from a site of exclusion to a forum for reflection. When the plane began its descent into Orlando, Terrell reflected on what they had accomplished over the past 2 years. The initial incident had been painful, but the response had created ripples of positive change extending far beyond one airline or one family. Skyline Airways had become a leader in equitable service, influencing industry standards and customer expectations. The Washington Foundation, established to support youth advocacy initiatives, had funded Belonging Everywhere chapters in schools nationwide. Most importantly, Jamal had transformed his painful experience into a platform for change, discovering his voice and purpose in the process. As the wheels touched down in Orlando, Terrell turned to his son. 2 years ago, we came here under very different circumstances. Jamal nodded thoughtfully. I was thinking about that too. I was so excited about Disney World then, but that's not even what I remember most about that trip. What do you remember most? Terrell asked. The moment in that conference room when you didn't just demand that Ms. Kavanaugh be fired, Jamal replied. You asked for something bigger, change that would help lots of people, not just me. Terrell squeezed his son's shoulder, touched by this perspective. As passengers prepared to deplane, the captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Orlando. We're especially honored today to have with us Terrell and Jamal Washington, whose courage and leadership have transformed not just Skyline Airways but the entire aviation industry's approach to equitable service. Spontaneous applause broke out among passengers who recognized the names and story. Jamal blushed slightly at the attention but acknowledged it with a polite wave. When they finally stepped onto the jet bridge, Diana the flight attendant handed Jamal a small envelope. From all of us at Skyline, she explained. A token of appreciation for what you've taught us. Inside was a card signed by the entire crew, with a simple message, thank you for helping us see what we couldn't see before. As father and son made their way through the terminal, they passed a Skyline customer service desk displaying the company's refreshed mission statement, connecting people with dignity, respect, and excellence, everywhere we fly. Outside in the Florida sunshine, Terrell looked at Jamal with pride. Ready for a proper vacation this time? Jamal grinned. Definitely. But maybe tomorrow we could visit that school where they're starting a Belonging Everywhere chapter. I promised I'd stop by if we had time. Terrell laughed, unsurprised by his son's commitment even during vacation. Of course. The work continues. Always, Jamal agreed, his young face reflecting wisdom beyond his years. But now we're not doing it alone. Indeed, they weren't. Across the country, flight attendants like Stephanie were creating more inclusive experiences for passengers of all backgrounds. Training programs incorporated lessons learned from Brenda's journey of accountability and transformation. Industry executives collaborated on standards that would ensure dignity for all travelers. And in classrooms nationwide, young people inspired by Jamal's story were finding their own voices to address injustice. What had begun with a painful moment of discrimination had evolved into a movement for lasting change, proof that even the most difficult experiences could, with courage and commitment, become catalysts for transformation that benefited many. As they walked toward their waiting car, Jamal suddenly asked, "Do you think things are really different now, or just temporarily better?" Terrell considered the question thoughtfully. Real change isn't a destination, it's a journey that requires ongoing commitment. We've made significant progress, but the work is never truly finished. Jamal nodded, satisfied with this honest assessment. Then we keep going. We keep going, Terrell agreed, as they stepped forward together into the future they were helping to create. What moments in this story resonated most with you? Have you witnessed or experienced situations where discrimination was transformed into positive change? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story about courage, accountability, and systemic change inspired you, please like, subscribe, and share it with others who might benefit from its message. Your support helps more stories like this reach those who need them. Thank you for joining me on this journey through Flight Attendant Hits Black Boy, Didn't Know His Dad Owns the Airline. May we all find the courage to transform painful moments into opportunities for growth and positive change. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most powerful response to injustice isn't just addressing the immediate wrong, but creating systems that prevent it from happening to others. This powerful story teaches us that confronting discrimination requires both individual courage and systemic change. When Terrell Washington chose strategic response over immediate reaction, he created lasting impact beyond a single incident. True transformation happens not by simply punishing one person, but by addressing the underlying systems that enable discrimination to flourish. Jamal's journey shows how even painful experiences can become catalysts for positive change when channeled constructively. His ability to transform personal humiliation into advocacy demonstrates that our greatest challenges often contain the seeds of our most meaningful contributions. The story also highlights the importance of accountability with opportunity for growth. Brenda's path from resistance to acknowledgement reminds us that people can change when given the chance to confront their biases honestly. Perhaps most importantly, we learn that change is never finished. As Terrell wisely noted, real change isn't a destination, it's a journey that requires ongoing commitment. The work of creating more equitable spaces belongs to all of us, requiring persistent effort and honest self-reflection about our own assumptions and behaviors. What moment from this story resonated most deeply with you? Was it Terrell's strategic patience, Jamal's transformation from victim to advocate, or perhaps Brenda's journey of accountability? Share your thoughts in the comments below and let me know if you've witnessed similar transformations in your own community. If you found value in this story about overcoming discrimination and creating systemic change, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories that examine important social issues through compelling narratives. Share this video with someone who might need this message of hope and transformation. Sometimes the stories we share become the catalyst someone else needs to speak up or take action. Thank you for joining me in exploring these complex but vital conversations. May we all find the courage to transform painful moments into positive change, both in our personal lives and in the systems we inhabit together.